Next topic, I want to talk about biometric surveillance. So first of all, I need to take a step back before I discuss should biometric surveillance be banned. It's going to be our red sticky. So first of all, we have to think what are biometrics, right? That's the first question. I want to break this down so that we all understand where we are. So what are biometrics? So think about things on you, your person, a fingerprint, or your face print, or the sound of your voice, or your retinas. All of those things are unique. They're identifiable to you. No one else has one exactly like you, for the most part. Any of these pieces of information can be used to identify you. Sometimes these are called biometric markers or biometric identifiers because it is easy to use them to identify a particular individual. And I'm sure all of you have seen crime shows where someone puts a very special piece of what looks like Scotch tape on a surface, you pull off a fingerprint, and ta-da, you identify the criminal, and they go to jail, and life goes happily ever after for Law and Order SVU or whichever crime show you're watching. But unfortunately, that's not the only time that these types of biometric markers or biometric identifiers are collected about you. If you use your fingerprint, your face, your eye, or your voice to open your phone, someone's collecting that information. And whether they're doing it for your benefit or for their own benefit, that information has to be protected. Because guess what? Just unlike some of the information that we talked about in the last segment that can be changed, who you are physiologically doesn't change, and you can't change it. And once that information is stolen from you or is able to be used on your behalf, you may never be able to get it back. I'm sure you've heard about deepfakes, the ability to mimic someone else's voice. The reason that privacy professionals and advocates find these so dangerous is because essentially part of the way that we as humans establish trust with each other is through things like our voice and through video, right? The phrase "pics or it didn't happen" because we're requiring photo evidence to be given in order for us to believe someone, to trust someone. Now, of course, Photoshop and other such programs have made that trust a little bit more difficult. But now with deepfakes, not only is it more difficult to trust people, but the harm that can be put against people, that can be exacted against other individuals also becomes heightened. There can be fake sex tapes. You can essentially have someone's face glued on someone else to make it look like they committed a terrible crime or did something else that they wouldn't or couldn't do. You can frame people for all sorts of things as long as it's easy to make it look and sound like they were the ones doing it. So of course, we need some kind of protection with these very, very specific and sensitive pieces of information that we carry around with us from the day that we're born. So, what is biometric surveillance? So essentially, now that you know what biometric markers and biometric identifiers are, how do you think the state will begin to use this information? Now, you may live in a city with closed circuit television or CCTV, which is essentially monitoring you all the time, right? There are traffic cameras, sometimes businesses have cameras outside, sometimes the city itself puts cameras all over the place. London is a great example of this, where there are just cameras everywhere. There are video feeds being collected all the time. And I'm sure you've passed under security cameras or seen a sign on a window saying, "Smile, you're on camera." This type of information in a closed circuit isn't necessarily problematic because of what is typically done or not done with it. However, in the hands of law enforcement, they've developed technologies to be able to identify individuals by things like their face, their voice, or even their fingerprints if they can get the right camera angle. This is really worrying because essentially, once they have the ability to recognize your face, they can recognize your face in a crowd, they can recognize your face in any type of situation where you may want to remain hidden, or even if you don't want to remain hidden, you just don't want to be surveilled. That is a piece of your freedom that is taken away by the fact that you are being constantly surveilled and that you can be easily identified by things you can't change. Now, this has been made a little bit more difficult during the coronavirus pandemic because many people were wearing masks. And in some ways, there was some hope amongst privacy professionals and amongst advocates that, hey, maybe the solution to this is to just have people wear masks like is done in many other countries for a variety of reasons. And once the masks are being worn, it becomes much harder for these facial recognition systems to put two and two together. However, there are lots of anti-maskers around, but additionally, many of us in this country and in most countries didn't actually didn't start their lives with the idea that mask wearing was normal and not unusual, or that you wore masks regularly, or even that you were supposed to wear a mask when you were sick, or can wear a mask when you're sick. So there is movement to get rid of these masks, which totally makes sense. If you were happy not wearing a mask, or if you didn't wear a mask usually beforehand, and all of a sudden you're being required to wear one, you may be very happy to finally take it off. But once you do that, it's much more easy to identify you, which is good, by the way, for regular human contact too. I don't want to make it seem like the whole mask, no mask thing just applies to your protection from law enforcement. But I'm sure you've walked past someone who you thought you recognized but weren't sure because you couldn't see their entire face. As human beings, we use faces to identify each other. But this can also be used by law enforcement to surveil us without our permission or knowledge. So recently, a petition has started circling around by a bunch of advocacy organizations that essentially says, hey, we should not allow law enforcement to use our speech patterns, our fingers, our faces, or our eyes, or any other biometric marker that they can think of to track us without our consent. Now, this is incredibly important because it's just one more way that we protect ourselves from unlawful searches and seizures. Fundamentally, at the very basis of American privacy is the understanding that we are not supposed to be searched by the law unless we've done something wrong or suspicious. Now, this has many loopholes, and over the years, this protection has gotten much weaker. In some other countries, like the European Union, part of the European Fundamental Charter of Human Rights is the fact that data and data privacy and just personal privacy is considered a fundamental right, a bedrock of what the rights of all Europeans are meant to be. So, in order for this type of privacy to be banned, there has to be some gargantuan and very important reason that the state or the locality can go after an individual or search for them in a way that violates their consent, because privacy is considered fundamental. It is the cornerstone of European personal rights and freedoms. Now, we don't really see it that way in the US, and there are many countries that don't see it this way. But the organizations that are looking to get this banned have essentially said, look, there are too many ways that this type of data can be abused. Therefore, regardless of what you believe about other types of privacy, there should be laws passed to ban the use of this type of data from public spheres. What's interesting is that this petition also asks for individuals to not use biometric identifiers or cameras where they're not particularly necessary, or to avoid giving that information to public authorities where possible. Now, of course, that can be difficult to do without a law, but the underpinnings of this petition is, hey, lawmakers, you should be making sure that under no circumstances are individuals being forced to give up their biometric identifiers without their consent. And that consent needs to be, open and honest and transparent. And even if they do give it up, this type of information should not be used by law enforcement. Now, this could make it easier for criminals in theory, since that will be the obvious pushback, but it's not like policing was invented yesterday or law enforcement was invented yesterday, and there are no other proven tactics that law enforcement can take in order to catch bad guys, as it were. So we come back to the original question, should biometric surveillance be banned? And the answer, in my personal opinion, is unequivocally yes. We have to ban this type of surveillance, because just like all types of data of surveillance that just collects and collects and collects, there's just data out there on anyone, almost on everyone. And the people with access to that data, who knows what they can do with it? Who knows what skills they have? And if there's nothing to protect us from the people who have access to that data, and this data just keeps getting collected, no matter how we change our appearance or our voice or anything else, or even our other types of information, then we get to a point where we do lose out on our freedom, and we do lose out on our privacy. And I want to say one more thing about surveillance in general before I end this segment. Many people believe that, hey, if you don't have anything to hide, then there's no reason to worry about being surveilled. If you're one of the good guys, there's no worries, right? Well, that opinion is fundamentally flawed in a number of ways. One of which is you probably have some level of, and I really don't like to use this word, privilege, as it were, if you can say that. Essentially, you have the ability to say, because I'm not doing anything wrong, no one will suspect me. Many groups of people do not have that luxury. No matter what they do, they are suspected of committing a crime or preparing for a crime or anything like that. So their kind of right to innocence, as it were, is taken away from them. And if they can be surveilled because they might commit a crime, then they lose more than just their privacy. They lose their freedom. Another thing is, if you're constantly being surveilled, you change your behavior. You might not think you do. You might think, well, who cares who's watching? But you do. Humans fundamentally do. As a species, we change our behavior based on who's around and who's watching us. And if we think that someone with the power to harm us or take away our liberties is constantly watching us, it represses our behavior. What happens if you think you're always being surveilled and you see an injustice? Are you going to go over and help? Or are you going to turn away, afraid of what the consequences might be for you if you're caught? But what else is it possibly that you might do? What might you not say if you're worried that you're always being surveilled? These things we don't often think about consciously, but in the back of our minds, we do change our behavior when the camera's rolling. Hell, I change my behavior when this camera's rolling. I'm definitely not the exact same person I am behind the camera that I am in real life. But that's the point, though. Even though that this is a friendly environment where I'm not worried about my liberty or anything else being taken away from me based on the opinions that I espouse here and the points that I make on this show, I do alter my behavior, whether I'm doing it to curate a larger audience, or whether I'm doing it just to be more performance-worthy and to make the quality of the show higher. We change our behaviors for better or for worse because we're being surveilled, even if that surveillance is voluntary or understood. So the constant surveillance and feeling that someone's always watching you, you're going to change how you behave, whether you believe it or whether you believe you're doing it or not. And so when this type of surveillance can identify you so well and in such a niche and pinpoint way, it really hampers what we might do and say. Now, if you think this is a good thing, I just fundamentally disagree with you. But wait till you're the one being surveilled all the time. I think your opinions on this particular issue will change. And you'll see that at the end of the day, the question of should biometric surveillance be banned is an easy one. The answer is yes.